anyone know who Dave Thomas is? He's the founder of Wendy's, right? Excuse my friends. He's a wonderful man. He was adopted, and his claim to fame, besides starting and making Wendy's into a large corporation, says he received his MBA long before he received his GED. Sorry. You know, my friends, he's the only corporate CEO that is founded on the financial report yielding a mop and a plastic bucket. Do you know what the MBA stands for? Masters of Business Administration. But not according to Dave Thomas. He says that MBA stands for mop, bucket, and attitude. And the attitude is directed at who? The customers, right? The customers. He's one of the earlier founders that talk about this. Johnson & Johnson is another company, but very few. They want to appease the customer before they appease the corporate board, which is unheard of in today's corporations, my friends. Customer comes before the board of directors, which is an amazing thing. But you see, that's where success lies. He knows that. He knows that. Jesus is teaching the same thing in today's gospel. If anyone wishes to be first, they will be last. The servant is what's important. What's he teaching there, my friends? Just to give? He's teaching a very important human principle that everybody in this church needs to instill in our minds and our hearts for our well-being. For my well-being, I need to take this gospel into practice. For your well-being. For your well-being. Did you ever get down, my friends, suffering depression, short term? I'm not talking where you need medicine right now. There's times where you need that. Loneliness, my friends. Ever feel those? At least once a month, Robert Weiss gave that landmark study on some of these issues. And he said at least once a month we're affected by those loneliness and depression at some stage, at some degree. No matter if you're rich or poor, no matter what color or race, it affects every single human person. And our challenge is what to do with it. What to do with it and where to turn. Where to turn. And I think that's one of our problems in today's society, my friends. We're not turning to the right things when we get into those areas of our life. And we adults need to be careful with this because we teach our children how to deal with stress, loneliness, depression. We teach them well by our very poor example. We teach them well, my friends, by our poor example, and we need to be careful with it. Jesus is saying, look, in order to obtain happiness, my friends, and contentment, you need to step out of yourself. You need to step out of yourself. Marion Hill was born with a silver spoon in a royal palace in Hungary. She went to the best schools in Vienna, and she married a young medical student called Otto. They got married, and then they moved to Hollywood, California. And then he got involved with making movies. And you may have heard of him way, way before my time, Otto Preminger. Real classics, some of the old classics, my friends, were produced. He was a director of some of those. But as he started to climb in success, her life spiraled down. She became a addicted to drugs and alcohol, had numerous affairs. She attempted suicide several times. Finally, she divorced him and moved back to Vienna. And somehow she stumbled upon Albert Schweitzer, who was a doctor. Brilliant man, brilliant doctor, but he spent half the year in Africa. And then towards his later life, he spent most of the year in Africa. But for a majority of it, he'd spent 6 months in Vienna, 6 months in Africa, and to help the poor. Well, she went to see him once a week for 6 months. And then he said to her, look, I need to go back to Africa. And she said, I'm going with you, of which she did. After she spent some time down there, she wrote a book, her autobiography, and you may have seen this, All I Want is Everything. It's the title of her book. All I Want is Everything. Great title. Time magazine picked this up and went down to Africa and interviewed her to talk about her book. And she said, you know, Albert Schweitzer says there's two kinds of people. They're helpers and non-helpers. She said, I thank God that he allowed me to become a helper. And in helping, I found everything. Isn't that interesting? I thank God he allowed me to become a helper. And in helping, I found everything. She said, most of my life I spent being served, and they were the unhappiest years of my life. Until we learn this principle, my friends, and many of you get it. Many of you get it. You know, I see you in and out. Ray, the reader, read a beautiful article on volunteers in the first evening of religious ed. And you know, my friends, he talked about, somebody read Patriot News, talked about volunteering. And she said, those who volunteer today are the ones who are the busiest. And that is so true. I see it all the time in the church. Those who help the church out and those who help volunteer are by far the busiest. And I also add, by far the happiest. By far the happiest. Why? They've learned this little lesson in today's gospel, my friends. In helping, we find everything. We find everything. Because when we touch someone else's life, my friends, we ourselves get touched. All I Want is Everything, my friends, that beautiful book that she wrote. And we find everything in being a servant of those who need us. God bless you.